You're on a channel dedicated to sci-fi horror, creepy, mysterious, and thrilling stories. Today, we have a book from horrorstories.app, a platform filled with terrifying and awesome sci-fi tales. Check out the link in the description. There's plenty to read and listen to. Now get comfortable. Here's a story that won't let you sleep.
The Gideon's interior was silent, save for the faint hum of its systems, but the air inside buzzed with unspoken tension. Dr. Elena Vasquez adjusted the strap of her data tablet as she followed Captain Malik down the narrow corridor. His shoulders were stiff, his back impossibly straight, and every step he took seemed to carry the weight of the alien world pressing down on them. "Splitting the group is a risk," Elena said finally, her voice low but insistent. The words hung between them like an accusation, forcing her to quicken her pace to stay beside him. Malik's jaw tightened, though he didn't slow. "We don't have a choice. Those tremors are getting worse. We need more data, and fast. Covering more ground is the only way." Elena frowned, unease blooming in her chest. "We don't know what we're walking into. Splitting up could make us vulnerable." Her voice softened, almost a plea. "It's not just protocol, Aaron. There's something about this place." He stopped abruptly, turning to face her with a look that was equal parts frustration and resolve. "I know the risks," he said, his tone clipped but not unkind. "But hesitation is just as dangerous as recklessness. We stick to protocol, and we'll be fine." Elena held his gaze for a moment, trying to read the cracks in his calm exterior. There was something there, doubt maybe, or the same gnawing unease she felt, but he buried it beneath a veneer of command. She swallowed her retort and nodded, though her fingers unconsciously brushed the flag patch on her jumpsuit, grounding herself in its familiar texture. Ahead, the rest of the crew waited in the airlock, a cramped space that seemed even smaller beneath the weight of their apprehension. Jenna Park leaned against the wall, her hands tightening the straps of her gear with meticulous precision. The faint whir of her mechanical arm betrayed her nerves, the small twitches syncing unnervingly with the vibrations they all felt beneath their boots. Tom Carter stood nearby, his usual grin absent as he adjusted the strap of his rifle. He looked up briefly as they entered, his gaze flicking to the viewport where the glass plains stretched endlessly beyond the ship. His voice was uncharacteristically somber when he spoke. "Feels like a bad idea, Cap. This place, it's under my skin already." Malik stepped into the center of the room, his tone firm but measured. "That's why we follow protocol. No deviations, no solo explorations. Regular check-ins. We keep this mission under control." His eyes swept over them, pausing on Neil Hargrove, whose relaxed posture seemed almost disrespectful. The biologist stood with his thin frame propped against the wall, his hands stuffed into his jumpsuit pockets, detached from the tension weighing on the rest of them. Neil's lips curved in a faint smirk as Malik's gaze lingered. "Understood, Captain," he said, his voice calm and faintly amused. "All right," Malik continued, his attention moving to the rest. "Elena, Park, you're with me. We'll head to the fissures and get a closer scan of whatever's causing the vibrations. Carter, you and Hargrove take the outer planes. Look for anything unusual. Flora, fauna, additional fissures. Stay within comm range." Tom's jaw tightened, and he exchanged a wary glance with Elena. "You trust him out there?" he asked, nodding toward Neil. Elena's stomach sank, but she kept her voice neutral. "Protocol is protocol. Just report anything you find immediately." Neil chuckled softly, the sound grating in the uneasy silence. "Always so cautious, Dr. Vasquez," he murmured, his words wrapped in condescension. Elena ignored him, forcing herself to focus on Jenna, who stood frozen in the corner. The younger woman's shoulders were tense, and her eyes darted toward the viewport as if searching for an excuse to stay aboard. Elena stepped closer, her tone softening. "You ready?" Jenna hesitated, then nodded once, the motion sharp and mechanical. "Ready," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Let's move," Malik ordered. The airlock hissed open, and the crew stepped onto the alien surface. The weak sunlight painted the glass planes in fractured hues, the jagged terrain glinting like a shattered mirror. Faint residue from the gazers clung to their boots, its phosphorescent glow giving the ground an otherworldly sheen. Elena's group moved toward the fissures, their footsteps crunching faintly against the brittle ground. The rhythmic vibrations beneath their feet grew stronger, each pulse resonating through Elena's body like the echo of an enormous alien heartbeat. "It's stronger here," Elena said, her eyes fixed on the chaotic data streaming across her tablet. Energy spikes danced erratically across the screen, interspersed with rhythmic patterns that defied explanation. Jenna's voice was barely above a whisper. "It feels like it's alive." Her mechanical arm twitched again, amplifying the eerie sensation. Malik glanced at her, his tone softening despite his unease. "Focus, Lieutenant. We're just here to get information." The fissures loomed ahead, glowing faintly as if they pulsed in time with the vibrations beneath. Elena knelt beside one, carefully positioning her scanner over its edge. The light from the crevice cast shadows across her face, its glow unnervingly organic. "Organic traces," she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "This isn't just geology. There's something alive down there, connected to something bigger." Malik crouched beside her, his eyes narrowing. "How close are we to identifying it?" Elena shook her head, her frustration mounting. "The data's too fragmented. It's like it's being distorted." Behind them, Jenna froze, her hand tightening around her toolkit. "Does anyone else hear that?" Malik and Elena straightened, their ears straining against the stillness. At first there was nothing, but then it came. A faint, distorted echo, like a voice carried on a non-existent wind. "There is no wind," Elena murmured, her stomach knotting. Jenna's breathing quickened, and her grip on her toolkit trembled. "It sounds like me, like my voice." Malik's hand dropped to his holstered weapon as he stood. "We're done here. Fall back to the ship." Elena opened her mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes silenced her. He wasn't commanding now. He was afraid. Reluctantly, she packed her scanner, her fingers brushing against her flag patch again as if drawing strength from it. The glow from the fissures seemed to pulse faster as they retreated, a silent, unsettling rhythm following them. Meanwhile, on the outer plains, Tom Carter and Neil Hargrove moved cautiously through the desolation. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the occasional crunch of their boots. Tom tried to lighten the mood, though his jokes came out hollow. "So, what's the plan if one of these plants decides it doesn't like us?" Neil didn't look up, his attention fixed on a cluster of alien vegetation. "Adapt," he said simply, his tone devoid of humor. Tom shook his head, muttering, "You're a real joy, Doc." The plants shimmered faintly as Neil reached out to touch one, its chitinous leaves shifting almost imperceptibly. The movement was mesmerizing, unnatural. "These aren't just plants," Neil murmured, his voice low with awe. "They're part of something extraordinary." Tom frowned. "Yeah, well, extraordinary usually means dangerous. Let's not forget that." Neil's lips twitched in a faint, humorless smile. "Danger is the price of discovery, Mr. Carter." Before Tom could reply, the ground beneath them pulsed violently, a deep, resonant thrum that sent vibrations up his legs. He spun, raising his rifle, but there was nothing. Just the shimmering light reflecting off the plains. "Did you feel that?" Tom asked, his voice tight. Neil didn't respond. His gaze was fixed on the horizon, where a faint shadow flickered briefly before vanishing. "What the hell?" Tom muttered. Neil finally looked at him, his expression unreadable. "We should head back." For once, Tom didn't argue. Back at the Fishers, Elena, Malik, and Jenna regrouped near the ship. The weak sun had slipped below the horizon, plunging the glass planes into an oppressive, phosphorescent glow. The whispers had returned, faint and disjointed, their source maddeningly elusive. Jenna froze, her breath hitching. "Do you see that?" Elena followed her gaze, and her blood ran cold. In the distance, barely visible in the dim glow, stood a figure. It was eerily still, its silhouette disturbingly familiar. "It's me," Jenna whispered, her voice trembling. "It looks like me." Malik stepped forward, his weapon drawn. "Inside, now." The figure didn't move, its presence more unnerving than any outright threat. Elena grabbed Jenna's arm, pulling her toward the ship as Malik covered their retreat, his eyes never leaving the doppelganger. When the airlock finally sealed behind them, the silence inside the Gideon was deafening. Elena leaned against the wall, her chest heaving as she tried to process what she'd seen. "It's adapting," she said, her voice barely audible. Malik holstered his weapon, his expression grim. "And it's getting bolder." Across the room, Jenna sat with her head in her hands, her mechanical arm twitching faintly in sync with the vibrations that seemed to echo through the very walls of the ship. None of them slept that night.
The horror doesn't end on this page. Subscribe to turn the next terrifying chapter.